A Comanche saved her from bandits in the forest. She returned favor when Comanches were driven out. The horse went down in the creek bed and May went with it, one boot caught in the stirrup for 3 terrible seconds before the current took her free. She came up gasping. The horse scrambled to the bank and stood there trembling, and she lay in the shallows and listened. Voices upstream. 2 men, maybe 3, arguing about something. About her, she realized. About what she carried in the saddlebag. She did not wait to hear more. The tree line was 40 yards east. She moved through the water on her hands and knees, keeping low, keeping the rush of the creek between her and the voices. The cold was immediate and complete. Her dress pulled at her like a second skin. The bottom was mud and loose rock, and she cut her palm on something she couldn't see. Into the trees, up from the creek, running. The pines were dense, and the light came down in thin columns, and she ran through them without knowing where she was going, only away. The voices behind her now louder. One of them had found her tracks. She knew by the pitch of it, the sudden shout, the sound of boots in shallow water, her lungs, the cold, the dark coming fast between the trees. She ran into him. He was simply there, a man on a horse, still as the pines around him, watching the direction she'd come from. She hit his horse's shoulder and fell back, and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him. She did not scream. She was past screaming. He said something she didn't understand. Then he leaned down and extended his hand. She took it. He pulled her up behind him in one motion, and the horse moved. Not the panicked crash she expected, but something quiet, deliberate, threading the trees with a sureness that seemed impossible in the dark. She held to the back of his shirt. The voices behind them grew confused, then distant, then gone. They rode for a long time. When he stopped, it was in a clearing where 2 other horses were picketed and a fire burned low. He dismounted and helped her down, and she stood in the firelight and looked at him. A Comanche man, older than she'd first thought, with gray threading his black hair, and eyes that moved to the tree line and back to her and did not seem especially concerned about either. He said something to the men at the fire. One of them brought a blanket. She was shaking so hard her teeth knocked together. She took the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders and sat where the man gestured, near the fire. He sat across from her. He did not watch her the way men watched her. He watched the dark at the edge of the trees. After a while, one of the other men handed her something in a tin cup. Broth of some kind, hot enough to burn. She drank it. No one spoke to her. No one asked her anything. She sat and drank, and the fire went down a little, and the shaking in her legs slowly stopped. She had been running from her husband for 11 days. She had $40 in the saddlebag and a letter from her cousin in Fort Worth and a plan that had seemed solid until the creek, until the 3 men who'd been watching the road out of Jacksboro and had recognized the horse, which was Aldous' horse, which she had taken without asking. She looked at the man across the fire. He was looking at her now, not at her face, at her wrist, where the bruise had come out from under her sleeve when she reached for the cup. She pulled the sleeve down. He looked back at the trees. She slept without meaning to, there by the fire, and woke to find the blanket had been tucked close around her, and the fire built back up, and the 3 men sleeping on the far side of it, and no one standing over her. The stars above were very bright. The creek made its sound somewhere south of them. She lay still and listened to the horses breathe and did not move until morning. The Comanche man's name was Repaid. She learned this on the 2nd day, when one of the other men, younger, he quick to laugh at something she couldn't follow, said it, and pointed at him in a way that suggested she should know. She told them hers. May Alcott. Not Aldous' name, the name she'd been born with. Repaid did not repeat it. He looked at her once, and went back to what he was doing, which was working a crack in one of the saddles with a piece of bone. They were 3 days from any settlement she recognized, and her horse had thrown a shoe on the wet rock of the creek bed. The younger man, whose name turned out to be Kohana, looked at the shoe and made a noise that seemed to confirm what she already knew. She would not get far on that horse today. She was, in practical terms, stranded. She thought about this while she helped with the fire and boiled what water they had and laid out her few wet things to dry on the rocks. She was not afraid of them. She examined this fact with some suspicion, the way you'd press a bruise to see if it still hurt. She had expected to be afraid, and she was not, and she could not account for it except that they had not done anything to make her so. They fed her. They did not crowd her. When she walked to the trees for privacy, no one followed. Enipe had given up his sleeping place nearest the fire without saying so. He had simply not taken it back after she'd slept there that first night. She was aware of this. On the afternoon of the second day, a rider came into camp fast, and the mood changed. He spoke to Enipe at length, and Enipe listened without expression, and then the rider was gone, and Enipe stood looking north for a while. She came to stand beside him. "Soldiers?" she said. He glanced at her. He spoke some English. She had learned this when he'd spoken to the horse in it. Quiet, straightforward words, the way you'd talk to something that didn't need to be deceived. "They are moving us," he said. "The reservation. It is decided." She looked north where he was looking. The sky was the color of old pewter. There was weather coming. "Where?" she said. He said the name. Indian Territory. She knew it the way you knew a word before you knew what it meant. Abstractly, without weight. She understood now it had weight. He turned and went back to the fire and began to organize things in that quiet, deliberate way he had, and she stood where he'd left her and looked north at the sky. The reservation order reached them in the form of a cavalry unit on the third morning. 6 men, a lieutenant barely older than Kohana, who rode into camp and read from a paper, and looked at Enipe, and then looked at May, who was crouching by the fire turning flatbread on a flat stone. "Ma'am," the lieutenant said, "you all right?" She stood up. She looked at him. She looked at Enipe, who was watching the lieutenant the way he watched everything, with patience, with no particular expression. "I'm fine," she said. "These men give you any trouble?" She thought about the blanket, the broth, the fire built back up in the night. The way Kohana had spent an hour yesterday working on her horse's hoof with tools he'd handed over carefully, explaining nothing, fixing the problem. "No," she said. The lieutenant looked at her a moment longer. Then he told Enipe they had 2 days. He said it the way men said things they expected to be argued with. Enipe did not argue. He nodded once. After the soldiers left, she sat back down by the fire and did not say anything. Neither did Enipe. The flatbread was burning, and she turned it. 2 days. Then he would be gone to a place that had been decided for him by men who had never seen his face. She thought about Fort Worth, her cousin's letter, $40. She thought about 11 days of running. She thought about the creek in the dark, and a hand reaching down for her and no hesitation in the taking of it. The flatbread was done. She put it on the stone between them. He took his half without asking. She took hers. The fire crackled between them, and the wind came through the pines from the north, and neither of them said anything about what the next 2 days would hold, but she did not saddle her horse. She went to town on the first of the 2 days. Mineral Springs, 9 miles, and she made it in 2 hours on the horse Kohana had fixed, and she went straight to the land office. The man at the land office was named Greaves. He had a gut like a rain barrel and a mustache that wanted trimming, and he looked at her the way men looked at a woman alone who'd been some days without a roof over her head. "I need to know," she said, "what the law is about the removal, about whether it can be—" "It can't," he said. "I'm not asking whether the order can be stopped. I'm asking whether there's land adjacent to the territory boundary that can be deeded, legally, to a Comanche man." Greaves looked at her. "Who are you asking for?" he said. She told him. He told her there was no mechanism for it. She said she was asking him to find one. He said that wasn't how it worked. She put $30 on the counter, 30 of her 40, and said she was asking him to find one anyway. He looked at the money for a long time. She rode back in the late afternoon with a document that was probably not worth the paper it was written on, and possibly was. You couldn't know. Some things you did anyway. She came back into camp and Enipe was at the fire, and he looked up at her when she dismounted. She crossed to him and held out the folded paper. He looked at it. He did not take it immediately. "What is this?" he said. "A deed for 12 acres on the territory side. It's not much. It might not hold. But it's got your name on it, and it's got a judge's stamp, and if anyone ever tries to—" She stopped. She looked at the paper in her hand. "It might not hold," she said again. He took it from her. He unfolded it slowly and read it. He read it twice. Then he folded it along its creases and held it. "You went to town," he said. "Yes." "For this?" "Yes." He looked at the paper. Then he looked at her. The fire had gone down to coals and needed wood, and neither of them moved to add any. "You could have ridden on," he said. "Fort Worth." She had thought about that. She had thought about it the whole 9 miles in and the whole 9 miles back. "I know," she said. He put the paper inside his shirt. She went to find wood for the fire. The temperature dropped below freezing that night, the first real cold of the season. She woke to find he had banked the fire close, and her blanket had been doubled. Her own and his, laid one atop the other while she slept. Ew. She lay still and looked at the stars and listened to the horses and the creek and the wind. She did not fold his blanket back. She pulled it closer and lay there in the warmth of it until morning came gray and cold over the pines. And when she finally sat up, he was already at the fire with coffee on, his back to her, giving her time to be awake before he turned around. She watched him. He turned around. She held out her cup. He poured.